Hi, welcome back to my channel. I'm Cassie Viella and I'm a realtor, property manager, and investor here in the San Antonio, Texas market. Today we're going to talk about how to deal with service or support animals as a landlord. And I decided to cover this because this is just one of those topics that always seems to come up when you're talking with other investors, when you're talking with landlords, as a huge problem is something that nobody really knows the rules on, and it's kind of one of those topics that really everybody seems to have a horror story about. And so I thought, let's cover it. Let's really dig deep into what the ADA and the Fair Housing Act actually say, so that we can make sure that we always are following the law and doing the right thing. I mean, even more importantly. So we're going to talk about that today. I tried when I was researching this to only pull from the actual HUD and the DOJ when I'm pulling. So anything you see on the screen that is like quoted, or all of that is exact verbiage from the Housing and Urban Development and the Department of Justice. There are guidelines that they release, because you can find a lot of different opinions out there. If you go on Bigger Pockets, I mean, it's a question that's asked frequently and has a whole range of responses. Everybody insisting that they know exactly what's right. So I wanted to just say, you know what, this is what HUD says. This is what HUD says, and so let's go with that. So first of all, a service animal is any animal that provides assistance or performs tasks for the benefit of a person with a disability, or that provides emotional support that alleviates one or more identified effects of a person's disability. So, you've got service animals that actually do tasks, and then you have emotional support animals. In this, in Fair Housing and Americans with Disabilities Act, they're treated the same. There's not really a difference in terms of whether or not you can allow them as a landlord to rent the property. So one key thing to remember when we're talking about this is that an assistance animal is not a pet. It's not treated like a pet in terms of, deposits and whether or not you can allow it. It's just a totally different category. So keep that in mind. And that's why a lot of what we're going to talk about, it differs from how you would normally deal with pets. Why would you be forced to accept the service animal in the first place? A lot of landlords have a no pets policy. And so they think, oh, well, I have no pets policy, you can't bring an animal. But according to the Fair Housing Act, not allowing somebody to bring a support or service animal is actually considered discrimination, because the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, specifically says that you need to do everything you can to make reasonable accommodations for somebody with a disability. And so a reasonable accommodation could be breaking one of your rules or altering a policy. And so in this case, to be compliant with Fair Housing and the ADA, you have to allow a service animal. But we're going to talk about some of the ins and outs of that. A lot of people, like I said, I don't allow pets, or I don't allow, pit bulls in my property. But unfortunately, because service animals are not pets, that rule cannot apply to them. And so you are not allowed to limit, no pets altogether, and you're not allowed to limit based on the breed or size of the animal. So, I'm talking mostly about dogs because that's the most common service or support animal. But, a lot of landlords say, okay, no dogs over 25 pounds, or no aggressive breed dogs. And in this particular circumstance, you're not allowed to say that. You're not allowed to make that a policy or enforce that policy on the service animal, because again, it's not a pet. And then on top of that, normally if somebody has a dog, most landlords charge a pet deposit. So, like $300 per pet or something. But in this case, with a service animal, you are not allowed to charge a pet deposit. Now, if their pet damages your property, you can still make them pay for it. You just can't collect that pet deposit up front. A lot of what I see online or when I talk to people is, okay, can I require proof? Because anybody could say, oh yeah, my dog's a service dog. How do I make sure that it's actually a service dog? And this is a really, really sensitive area. It's very gray. In reading through the verbiage from HUD, there aren't black and white, there aren't clear lines. But basically, if the disability is apparent, like if the person is blind and has a dog to help them, you don't need to get any further proof because you can see the proof, right? Like you can see, okay, that's obviously a disability, it's obviously a service dog. But if it's a disability or a support animal that's not as obvious, you can ask for information to back up the claim that they're making. But you can't force, they don't have to give you detailed information. You can't, make some sort of qualification process, like, oh, it has to be a letter that says these things, or it has to be a letter from a certain kind of doctor. You can't put those kinds of things in place because, you're just giving that person an undue burden there, is how I interpreted what HUD and DOJ were saying. So you have to kind of walk this fine line of, you don't want to be accused of discriminating against a person with a disability, and then, making sure that they do in fact have a disability and they're not just trying to break the pet policy. It's a really fine line, but I would encourage you to err on the side of caution and, believe whatever evidence you get of the disability. There are different kinds of information they can use. They could use, disability benefits or some kind of assistance program they're on, or a letter from a doctor is really commonly used. Or just, explaining it. You don't have to have those things. If somebody tells you, like, this is my support animal and, I have PTSD, so I have the support animal, and you could say, okay, that's fine. I'm comfortable with that. You're not required to have this. It's more kind of what you can ask for. The important thing is to note that you can't limit, oh, I only accept this kind of proof. That will really go against the rules. So requiring written evidence is, it's that gray area that we've been talking about. Possibly you can ask for written evidence. But look at this language here. A resident or applicant for housing makes a reasonable accommodation request whenever she makes clear to the housing provider that she is requesting an exception, change, or adjustment to a rule, policy, practice, or service because of her disability. Well, she should explain what kind of accommodation she's requesting, and if the need for accommodation is not readily apparent or not known to the provider, explain the relationship between the requested accommodation and her disability. So to request that accommodation, and in this case, the accommodation is breaking a policy to allow a service animal. To make that request, they just need to make it clear what they're asking for, basically. So you can't make a whole bunch of hoops for the person to jump through for that. And I want to finish up with this because, the penalties are very severe if you are not complying with the ADA. So you've got a maximum penalty of $75,000. Up to $150,000 for another violation. So, this is some serious trouble that you can get into for this. And then for the Fair Housing Act, if you are found to be discriminating, it's $16,000 for the first time, $37,500 for the next, and $65,000 for the third time. So, you really want to be careful that you're not discriminating based on the fair housing guidelines, which are tricky, because it's like I would kind of think, well, I don't discriminate. I wouldn't discriminate against anybody, but the guidelines, it's not that simple. You've got to make sure that you're following the law. And so I think the most common question that I get from landlords is, what if my insurance policy on the home doesn't cover aggressive breeds? And so if somebody comes and they have a pit bull and your insurance company doesn't cover pit bulls, what's going to happen? What do you need to do? I wanted to make sure, again, that I only included in this presentation information from HUD or the DOJ or something official, right? So I researched online and I found a lot of different opinions about it from different people, but this is what HUD and DOJ actually say. So I even screenshotted the memo from 2006 that really talks about how to deal with that. So here is the guidelines. An accommodation is unreasonable. So this kind of deals with if somebody's requesting an accommodation that causes financial or administrative burden on the housing provider, then you can reject that accommodation. So that's where the gray area really comes in, because there is a clause that would let you not accept the service animal. But pinning down what situations warrant that and which ones don't, that's where the gray is, and that's where it gets really tricky. And the examples that they give in most of their literature are like, oh, if it's a horse and you don't have a yard for a horse, or something really obvious like that. But obviously this is a little more nuanced. This memo says if an accommodation is an accommodation is unreasonable if it imposes undue financial and administrative burden on a housing provider's operations. If a housing provider's insurance carrier would cancel, substantially increase the cost of the insurance policy, or adversely change the policy terms because of the presence of a certain breed of dog, HUD will find that this imposes an undue financial administrative burden on the housing provider. So that seems to say that, oh yeah, if your insurance provider doesn't allow pit bulls, then you can reject a service animal pit bull. Of course, we have a however, though. However, the investigator must substantiate the housing provider's claim regarding potential loss or adverse change to the insurance coverage by verifying such a claim with the insurance company directly and considering whether comparable insurance without the restriction is available in the market. If the investigator finds evidence that an insurance provider has a policy of refusing to insure any housing that has animals without exception for assistance animals, it may refer that information to the DOJ for an investigation to determine whether the insurance provider has violated federal civil rights laws. And so, basically that to me says you're going to have you have the burden of proof to say, oh, this is going to cause financial stress because my insurance company won't allow this breed. But you have to prove, okay, what would happen? You have to confirm with your company what would happen if that breed was on the property. Would they cancel the policy? Would they increase the rates on the policy? Would they change the policy? So you have to verify that with your insurance company first. Then you would have to demonstrate that there are no other plans in the marketplace. So, just because one insurance provider says, no, we won't do any kind of policy if there's a pit bull on the property, you have to go shopping and see, are there other insurance companies that would provide the same coverage? And I can tell you from experience, because I've had a pit bull before, there are companies that you can get comparable insurance through. So you would have to prove that, and I think that burden of proof is going to be pretty high. It's going to be pretty difficult to prove that you just really couldn't get insurance just because of this animal. Furthermore, I went ahead and I texted my insurance guy that he insures all of my stuff, and we've had him on the show before. He's I think if you go back almost a year ago, I think, but it's insurance for landlords. So Joel Lutz, I asked him, hey, what would happen in this situation? And he says, first of all, don't worry about it because the renter's insurance should take the primary responsibility. So as long as your renters have a renter's insurance policy, that should be fine. But if the landlord's coverage had to get involved, it would be a hard time. They would have a hard time denying coverage when the tenant could not be discriminated against due to their dog being a service dog. So he basically told me that, they're under the same fair housing or, anti-discrimination laws that we are. So they really wouldn't be able to deny a claim on a service animal. And now, again, that's just one person saying what their company would probably do in a hypothetical situation. So I'm not a lawyer. I'm not saying that's definitely the case, but that did make me feel a lot better. Like, okay, it's just, even in this weird off chance that something happened, it probably wouldn't be a huge issue. And so I think at the end of the day, that claim of my insurance policy doesn't cover aggressive breeds is one of those things that we get, really twisted up and nuts about, but really at the end of the day isn't that big of a deal. And so I think all together, what I would advise is, when in doubt, always make sure you're following fair housing laws. Make sure that if the person has a disability and has a need for a service to support animal, that you accommodate that need. I know a lot of people try to find ways around it, and it's just not worth it. Why are you gonna, you talk about killing your cash flow, if you get a $75,000 fine, that's cash flow for years and years, right? So I just think it's not worth it. Just accommodate tenants to the best of your ability, do what you can, and just try to find ways to accommodate everybody. So that's just kind of my philosophy overall in landlording, is trying to work with the tenant instead of against them. And I think in this case, it's certainly, everything I've read warrants that same opinion. So if this was helpful, if you like real estate, if you like market updates and home maintenance tips and investing tips, all that kind of stuff, please remember to subscribe to my channel. I am really enjoying building up this channel and trying to make my videos better. So if you have any tips, if you have any questions or more subject topics that might make a good video, please comment below. Tell me what you think. Tell me if you think I'm wrong. If you know a lawyer, tell them to come show me where I'm wrong. That would be great, because like I said, I'm not a lawyer. I'm just trying to do the research and do the digging and find out what the DOJ had to say about it. So remember to leave a like, and I'll see you next time.